Seema Khanwalkar, and she's currently an adjunct faculty at CEPT University, and she's also had courses that she has taken at NID and IIM Ahmedabad, where her courses in brand and media communication are really sought after. I had the pleasure of being part of a recording that she just had, where she was talking about what she does and what drives her, and that is enough to reel me in to want to sit and go through this entire presentation. So,
thank you so much. Let me stand. This bar stool is not for old people like me. Right? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I'm usually very used to talking to students. So I'm very, I'm very nervous today because, very, very big personalities are sitting here. So, yeah, but thank you, Anthony, Param, and Pulkit, sorry. And Pulkit, I came here because of Pulkit. I mean, to be very honest, and Param, who first convinced me, and then Pulkit, because I genuinely believe that if a student calls you, you should go. And that is a sentiment that I have kept for life, because बुलावा जब आता है तो student ही तो याद करते हैं ना, कोई और करे ना करे, so thank you for thinking of me, and thank you so much. So I saw the theme, which was resurrection, and I felt like, honestly, I felt like I had been sort of, if I borrow from what Anthony was saying, who am I, right? I feel like I'm a Batman on free fall, so I keep getting unstuck, unstuck, right through my life. I was educated in Kendriya Vidyalaya, which is like a lovely government school. And then I went to very Brahmin college in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, because I didn't get admission in Stella Maris, because my CBSE scores were not good enough. And then I went to JNU. So 10 years of MA, MPhil, PhD at JNU completely changed me as a person. So you can imagine my journey from there, and then I went to the Indian industry. So I was embarrassed to tell my friends back in JNU that I'm working for the industry for many years, till my PhD guide, who is a very strong Hindutva, and that's one thing we learned at JNU, is to respect one another, despite whatever ideology you had. So I have very dear friends from the Marxist school. I have very dear friends from, and I went to Kapil Kapoor and I said, sir, he said, what are you doing now? I said, sir, I'm working for the industry. He said, तो तुम इतनी छोटी सी आवाज़ में क्यों बोल रही हो? Industry, जोर से बोलो. So I said, sir, JNU में तो this is anathema, right? So he said, तो क्या हुआ? पेट तो पाल रही हो ना खुद का. Or you're also giving opportunity to other students in the future who will learn sociology, history, anthropology, and can get a job. Because not everyone can get a job as a teacher. Yeah, so that was my journey, and I was so thrilled when I heard that, that I had a PhD guide who took me through that. So it is very karmic to have been called to this forum where I really feel reborn. After having worked for 30 years, continuously without a break, I've come a full cycle where I started, where I talk about applying theory to practice. And my background is in pure theory, pure method, pure social sciences. So what do? I give research solutions to creative practice. Now that sounds as antipodal as it can get, because it's very exciting. It's very exciting. And I learned, where was my beginning? You were talking about oral traditions. It sort of was too much for me to listen to that, because that's where I started my journey in Goa, where I was doing my PhD on oral folk narratives. That was my PhD thesis. And I tried to understand how performance cultures, exactly the question that you asked, how do they sustain themselves? This culture has sustained themselves on orality for 500 years and not ever written down their script. okay? And they meet on a cyclic ritual. You see, again, the concept of time, is very cyclic. They know exactly when the festival takes place. This is called Zagor. If you ever go to Goa, this takes place around October, November, and there are many Zagors across Goa. It's beautiful. It is a festival where everybody is a co-celebrant. So it doesn't matter whether you're Hindu, Muslim, Christian. You just have to be there, you have to participate, and this arena is called the Mand, which is the word which is taken from mandala, which is the central performing arena, right? Where all differences, everything is forgiven. So you can say what you want. It's like the carnival, the sense of the carnival, where you are given, it's like a freedom to express yourself, but once you're out of the mand, right, you go back to being what you were, whether you were a Christian, you're a Muslim, but in the mand, whole night, it's called Jagaran, whole night performance. A lot of social issues are discussed in this mand, okay? So things like, changing times, changing politics, changing culture, changing religion, everything is, so this is almost like a social science textbook for them. So it's almost like a reflexive way in which they see themselves and how they have passed through 500 years. It's a beautiful, and I spent 4 years, 4 rich years with this community. One story that, when Anthony was talking about who we are as practitioners, I remember I went to Goa with this huge ego, believe me. I'm from JNU and I'm come here to do research. The entry to that village was a tea shop, So now it's not a security gate. It's not like the gated communities we have, right? It's a tea shop. I go to the tea shop. Where are you going? In Konkani, right? I'm a Marathi speaker and I could understand a bit of Konkani. So they were like, where are you going? I said, I want to go into the village. Why do you want to go into the village? I said, because I want to do research. What is research, right? Where are you from? So I said, I'm from Delhi. Immediate suspicion. Why? Delhi, right? So I was like, oh my goodness, what did I say? They didn't allow me entrance to that village for 3.5 to 4 weeks. I would go and have pav and chai every day in the hope that I would be taken into the village. No, you're not convincing enough. So my ego was broken. First thing in anthropology that I learned was, since you're a filmmaker, I'm sure you would have had a similar, of how to enter a space and how to actually accessibility is the biggest issue of human civilization. And we take it so much for granted. You see, so every society has its gatekeepers, right? And here, I mean, it didn't matter to them what is JNU. It doesn't matter at all. This is my community. This is my village. This is my, territory. How are you entering it? So I said, okay. So finally, they got so fed up of me. They said, okay, we'll take you down. This was, Donapola Plateau, and then there is a drop, and there are those 2 villages there. So they took me in down, and on the way, there are these cashew plantations, right? So they asked me, do you know about kaju? I said, yeah, I drink feni. So they said, okay, how is feni made? I said, it's made from the kaju fruit. They said, do you know which kaju fruit? I said, so I pointed out to one ripe one. And they said, so is it that kaju fruit which you distill and you drink? That's where I was caught. I said, yeah, I think so. They said, okay, fine. They took out their koito. Koito is that sickle. They took it out and they cut the kaju fruit and they said, drink. So I was like, should I not? So I drank it. It sliced my tongue, okay? Now, it was so sharp that I was jumping like a cat on a hot tin bricks, PG Woodhouse. to quote him, right? And I was literally in tears. These guys were laughing. Typical Goanchos who love to laugh. They were like, serves you right. You thought you would come here and you know everything about kaju and fruit and fenny, and this is what is tourism in Goa anyway. Everybody thinks they can dress in dotted shorts, polka dot shorts, and they think they go to Goa and they enjoy it, right? So I was like, so then they said, first of all, when you have fenny, it's the second distill. It is not the first one. So that was my first lesson in anthropology, is that those days there was no Google. Today, even today, in the day of Google and technology, nowhere will you find this information about the kaju fruit. You will not find this richness with which it was expressed. And that was my first lesson, which broke all my learning in the classroom. And it was fascinating that then, of course, I spent 5 years. So this is where my beginning was. These are the dudes who took me through my learning years. So there is Roland Barthes, there's Claude Levi-Strauss, there's Charles Peirce, and there's the famous Umberto Eco. Yeah? These are the guys who sustained my brain for 9 years in JNU. Beautiful works. I sincerely recommend you to add to your library if you can, because I think young people should be exposed to Roland Barthes for sure, his book on mythologies, and of course Umberto Eco. Not just that, I also learned about theories of language, Bhartrihari, absolutely beautiful book, and philosophy on language and meaning, right? Buddhist nominalists, the theory of apoha, and Bharata's Natya Shastra, Panini's Ashtadhyayi. So the whole learning experience was so rich, and I would sit in Romila Thapar's classes, because that is what JNU allowed us to do, is to sit anywhere, everywhere. And that's why I'm very happy that your company is having a forum like this, because learning happens across disciplines and across subjects. So this was my beginning. And the philosophy that shaped me is by Charles Sanders Peirce, who's a famous American semiotician. The entire universe is perfused with signs if it is not composed exclusively of signs, which is where we challenge the idea of truth. What is truth? We keep saying true, true, reality. Even in Indian philosophy, reality is something that has always been questioned. It is interpretation. It is really all about how we interpret things through signs. Everything comes to us through a sign. Language is a sign. A word is a sign. So from a verbal sign to a visual sign to a oral sign, everything. So a world is perfused with signs. And what we do with our world, whether it is AI or whether it is HP, it is all about how we interpret meaning. So my whole thing has been about understanding how we create meaning in our worlds through science. How do signs affect our lives? Look at Gandhi. He's a super sign. Till today, we are unable to forget him. Whether his statue is broken, or whether we make a film on him, Munna Bhai, or whether we look at him as a father of the nation, or whether we have his Gandhi Giri that is celebrated almost 8 decades later, he's still very much with us, right? So the idea is that the sign is with us. The person is not with us, but the sign and what he stands for, and for many things. Whether it was his experiments with truth, sexuality, or his whole thing with the salt, the dandi, everything. So he continues to affect our lives in so many different ways. So we may not think, some people may not think of it as him as saint, but I don't think it'll affect him, even if he was alive today, right? So I stumbled upon becoming a semiotic consultant, where I applied these principles and these learnings to brand strategies. Why? a journey I stumbled upon because I did not get a job. Believe me, as a PhD, I came to Bombay and there was no job. Universities did not want a MA in English literature and a BA in English literature and an MA in linguistics. Now, these are the ironies that universities in India have, which we still don't answer. So I come back to very, very fundamental, basic educational issues, which is why my guide said, Seema, you getting a job in the industry is paving way for so many young students in the future who want to do history, who want to do philosophy, who want to do anthropology, and yet find employment. At the end of the day, everybody has to live, right? And you have to live by what you learn. So I of course, started off with a pay of 2,500 with Siddharth Kak, who hired me as his research director for the program Surabhi. And I didn't know a thing about television except that I would watch it. And, so I was asked to do storyboarding, so I didn't know a thing about storyboarding or researching. And he offered me 2,500. And I was by then 25. There were 16-year-olds who were earning 50 times more than I was. But I said, no problem. Those are, the 2,500 will at least get my train fare up and down Santa Cruz to Andheri. No problem. So I took it. Now, that was another thing that I think JNU helped me is ki, it's okay, no job is small. Don't follow money. Follow what you learn. And by 3 months, I was earning, of course, 5 times more than what he had offered me. But I learned so much, which is to think on your feet. So when we went to Mauritius, I had to put together story ideas. So we would work from 4 in the morning to, say, 12 in the night. That was our schedule. And I hate shooting after that. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah, because camera work is so tough, which is why I asked him to sit, and he's not sitting. Yeah, so, yeah, so the point is that how do you build a story idea? I was just thrown into Mauritius and told, now, do some research and come up with a research idea, with a story idea. And by evening, I had to come up with what we called, the script. It was so tough. And I did it on the job. Of course, 2 years I sustained myself. And then Titu Aluwalia, who was that time the chairperson of ORG Mark, he called me. And of course, I had run out of money again. So he called me, and I remember I went in Hawaii chappals. And Titu being Titu, very, very snobbish. He looked at me, he looked at my chappal, and he says, you are the semiotic consultant? I said, yes, Titu, don't look at my chappal. Okay, let's try this out for 3 months. And now it's been 35 years, and Titu is still a very dear friend. So the point is that a journey into meaning making and interpretations in branding and advertising through signs. Again, like I said, I was Batman on free fall. I didn't know a thing about branding. I didn't know a thing about advertising, except that as a Marxist critic, I just had to say that everything is bad. Yeah, because they are in the market, right? So consumerism is bad. And then I found myself having to defend it, or at least do something worthwhile. So a journey of intense analysis and deep dive into the unconscious, the deep structures that the user audience is unable to articulate, but sees, hears, and touches. This is a very fabulous book, which again, I would highly recommend for your library. It's by Judith Williamson, where you decode advertisements. We can only understand what advertisements mean by finding out how they mean and analyzing the way in which they work. So the question about who your user is, yeah, who your audience is, also lies in the structure of the ad, which you unconsciously create your target audience as a result of that. Then I was very, very blessed to have worked with this fabulous woman called Virginia Valentine. She was the first woman to have started a company called, she was a PhD in linguistics. Like me, I had a PhD in linguistics, and she started a company called Semiotic Solutions with her equally talented and fabulous husband, Monty Alexander. Both are no more, unfortunately. But my first partnership was with them. T2 had a knack of picking on good people. Now, whether he did it, but he did invite them. And those days, we were the handful. We were like 3 or 4 semioticians. Today, you have like 10,000 of them. And I have no idea what they do. But so the basis of what I learned from them was that culture is very dynamic and transformative, right? So if you're going to so this is again for practicing communication strategies. It changes so fast. It's like literally an overnight change. So you have to be at the edge. You have to understand from where the change is coming. So your eyes, your ears, everything has to be tuned in a 360-degree sense. If you can understand the paradigms of the past, the present, and the future, you can ride on cultural waves. Now, the word ride would throw me out of JNU today, but the idea is that you catch it for your so you need to contextualize. Now, Anthony talked about context. That's another thing which runs right through my practice is context. You need to contextualize your communication strategies. This was influenced by A.K. Ramanujan, who's a brilliant philosopher and a linguist who died, who was in Chicago, if you can go through his book. So he asked 3 simple questions. The term, is there an Indian way of thinking, can be asked in 3 different ways. Is there an Indian way of thinking? Indian, with an emphasis on Indian. Is there an Indian way of thinking? Yeah. And the third is there an Indian way of thinking? So the idea is that you try and capture the deeply contextual meaning. So what is this? It's a famous yes that we have in India, right? The Taleatu Bommai. Where is the South Indian here? He's not here. There you are. Yeah. So this, yeah, the Madurai. It's from Madurai, if I'm right. So that is exactly what we Indians do, right? When foreigners come, they just don't understand whether it's a yes or a no. Yeah, we just do this, and this is the famous nod that we have. And my first semiotic project was Tata Tea in 1998. This was the famous ad, which is Anu Agarwal, which was a take on Jumma Chumma Dede, if you remember. She was very fresh then, and she was very popular. So that time, Tata Tea was all about, the tea was all about, energy, male, virile energy. So you had tea and you ran through the glass and you broke the glass and you sort of, you conquered. Yeah, and that was all about, so when we decoded advertising, so what we did was our recommendations. We did consumer research. Now, one of the things that I always do, even as a consultant, is to do consumer research along with semiotic reading, which is mainly desk research. So from the focus on the woman as a metaphor for tea, where every tea ad was showing her either serving tea to be married, yeah, or those days, not now anymore, or she was convincing, like the Fair and Lovely ads, where she was sort of, trying to get something. So she was servile to the internal and essential semiotics of tea, which is so deeply powerful in our culture. Why do we drink tea? Does it always have to be the woman's responsibility to convey that, tea is a good drink to have? If you remember when we were traveling, Rajesh, I don't know if you're my generation or you're younger. Is any of you, maybe you and I are same generation. Yeah, so when we used to travel in train, yeah, we used to wake up after 30 hours of train journey, wo chai, right? We never questioned kahan se pani aata tha. For all you know, it was terrible water taken from that train station. But that was so strong in our head. So we drank tea in those Kullards, cutting chai glass, which was not washed also. right? And we don't even know if it was washed properly. But the point is that it was so deeply, and the context was so varied. So we opened up the discourse for Tata tea. And we said, why is your tea only in drawing rooms? Right? I mean, tea is outside. Tea is at stations. Tea is everywhere. And you're still talking about the woman, being the main person. So the goal of the study was to open up the discourse of tea, not just for the brand, but in life itself. Because tea drinking is about context, occasions, feelings, like I said. So from tea as a song and dance and breaking through glasses, so it sort of, Tata Tea then brought out, I wasn't responsible for the ads, okay? We were just doing research. So the agency takes over after we give recommendations. A thinking drink, right? So we told them, look at the semiotics of the word, language. Tea is about energizing, refreshing. It hits your brain, right? It's not just about physical activity. So the whole thing changed, and the discourse of tea, Red Label, and every other brand then latched on to the whole thing. And of course, now we have a whole new. The second project, and I have about 30 projects. I'm just going to show you 4 or 5. The second memorable project was with the World Gold Council. We did a 6-country project, and I was part of the India and the Dubai part of it. And World Gold Council was struggling at that time. They were losing out to diamonds. You see, diamond had already made, young people were buying more diamonds for wedding rather than gold. So World Gold Council was very worried. They said, like, how do we increase, or I think platinum at that time was also coming up in the US, how do we increase the interest in gold? So this was a very fulfilling project. And for the first time, I went to Dubai and I saw gold like, literally hanging. And I couldn't believe my eyes, where, like it was like that. I'm sure all of you have seen it, and it's so overwhelming. So then we came back to India, and we did a retail study of how gold is sold in our country. If you remember, when our mothers or grandmothers bought gold, what did they do first thing? They would, of course, those days phone bhi nahi tha. They would go and call the neighbors and say, chai ke liye aao. Yeah? And then the discussion would be around the gold that you bought from that shop. So it was a conversation more than just wearing it. It was about comparison. It was about, oh, you bought it for this price, I got it for a lower price, and I got it for a higher price. And it was about community building, right? So you bonded over gold, you bonded, and your conversations, and then of course chai, Tata tea also would have come into the picture as a result of that, right? So the point was that we gave them the line, speak gold. So gold was not bought, it was spoken about. So it was more than just a piece of jewelry which was worn, it was more about talking, it was more about comparison. And as a result of that, I'll just quickly, is there a,
exclusive gold jewelry available at Ginny Gold outlets.
so WGC was the overall authority which was giving, directions to all the brands. So when we said speak gold, WGC gave all the other brands to work on this. Coincidentally, soon after, I was taken on a project for Tanishq, which was with McCann Erickson and Santosh Desai. So Santosh called me up and said, will you do a semiotic project as a consultant with us? And the output of that project was, again, we opened up the discourse for Tanishq. It was pathetic. The retail environment was so bad at Tanishq that in those days, if you walked in, you would feel like you're a nobody. The women out there or the people out there would treat you like, kitna paisa hai, right? Only then can you enter. So these were kind of things that we gave them as feedback. We gave them feedback about designs which were too out of the way, right? And it felt like if you were buying gold, you had to have lots of money. So we said, so the first ad that they brought out, I mean, I'm really cutting, was Tales of Tradition.
मनमोहक जेवरात से सजी जून हाक पर जिसे रचा तनिष्क ने
And of course, they haven't stopped singing since then. Because then they also introduced, of course, they were very happy because they started introducing new range of jewelry. So we said jewelry gold can cost from 1,000 to 1 million. Why are you, isolating women who can aspire to buy gold? And, so then they brought out things like Mia, which I'm sure and then, of course, there was this self-image narratives.
Hi,
Which
Megha. Heard you were working late
I'm
last
sure you've
night.
seen this ad.
How's it looking?
Nice. You want to take a look?
Wow. I love it.
Thanks.
I'll have to get going. The clients are waiting. Hey, Megha, lose those, na? Let's have the clients concentrate only on the presentation.
Hi, good morning. Sorry. Is it okay for you? This is fine.
Don't worry. The presentation looks even better than me. As beautiful as your work. Mia, by Tanishq.
So the launch of Mia actually helped a lot of young women afford. Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, a lot of young women, and we also helped them change the design of jewelry from chunks to very very. Another very very interesting project was with Unilever. At that time, Maggie was like completely saturated in the market, and Unilever was bringing in Knorr into India. And they were like, what do we do? I mean, Maggie's taken over every possible positioning space. So, how do we counter it? So I did a decoding of their ads. And you see, again, when Anthony, I'm sorry, I'm going to take all of your points. Yeah. So the CEO, the top guys, and I always like to present to the top guys because the marketing guys in the middle are nervous. You see, they have to please their boss. But the boss is the one who takes the decisions. Yeah? So it's great fun to have an eye contact with the MDs. This is for all you young people. Yeah? Because they are the ones who are very sharp. So the branch head of Knorr was sitting in my presentation. And as we were talking, he stopped the presentation for a minute and he said, just a minute, wait there. What did you say about time? Time, again. Yeah? Time is not linear. See, Maggie by that time had sold anytime Maggie. And my hostel life was enriched by Maggie. I mean, I don't think I could have survived without Maggie. All of us from NID and CEPT and JNU, I mean, it was like the life, right? And then here is a brand that comes and then he says, let's take a look at that evening time. Yeah, there is that one spot where we can sneak in. And as a result of that, they brought out this ad.
चुप क्या स्नैक्स
कुछ बोला?
मैं नहीं ये
टमी बोले स्नैक्स?
7 बजे
मम्मी बोले नो. डिनर कौन खाएगा?
टम्मी की सुनो या मम्मी की
तमी. यमी?
नया नॉर सूप 100% रियल वेजिटेबल्स के साथ इतना हेल्दी कि मम्मी खुश, इतना यमी कि
टम्मी खुश
7 बजे नॉर सूप्स 100% रियल वेजिटेबल्स के साथ.
This launched Nor, this ad 7 o'clock time, which Maggie had not owned, and this was a space that we, gave them. And as a result of that, suddenly Nor found a whole new discourse opened up for hunger and food, right? So then this was another PepsiCo brand that I worked on, which was, I think you were with PepsiCo. Yeah, so 7-Up, where they were launching 7-Up in India, and they had this character called Fido. You see, Fido was a big hit in the US. Fido was part and parcel of their, life or whatever. Ghost is Casper the friendly ghost. Now, they didn't know what to do with Fido. He'd come here, the consumers said, पता नहीं क्या कर रहा है. Yeah, ना bottle पे पता चलता है, ना ad पे पता चलता है, right? Now what do we do? What do you do with Fido? So now then we said, let's revisit the whole idea of a lime drink, right? What is the context in India of a lime drink? Nimbu pani, nimbu. You see a whole lari of nimbu, and what happens to us in summer? I to go crazy. I buy as many limbus as possible in my fridge because the idea of nimbu is cerebral. It cuts through your brain, right? And that nimbu wala, the lari wala, is so important to us in the month of summer, right? So we said,
Seven Up का natural lemon lime flavor करे mind fresh, mood fresh. Seven Up try. Uncle, sports पे देखो. Seven Up try.
if you notice, Fido comes at the last. Yeah, unlike in the US ads where he's there right through, we rescued him and made him come in the end. This was another very, very fascinating study I did with Parle-ji, where we changed the whole paradigm of education. And this was very fulfilling for me because every other brand was talking about competition, whether it was Bonvita, MFD drinks, winning, mother running the race, and the whole thing. And in the country was also going through this whole thing of 99.98 percentile, and then your child is a success. And
रोको मत, रोको मत, रोको मत, टोको मत, रोको मत, टोको मत, रोको मत, टोको मत, सोचने दो, ये न सोचने दो, ये न सोचने दो, रोको मत, टोको मत, सोचने दो, ये न सोचने दो, ये न सोचने दो, अरे टोको मत, इन्हें सोचने दो, मुश्किलों के हल खोजने दो, रोको मत, टोको मत, रोको मत, टोको मत, निकल ले तो दो आसमां से जुड़ेंगे.
So this was, this is a long ad. So of course I moved back to academia because I didn't want to sustain myself just selling, strategic inputs. I really wanted to teach. I love teaching. I love being with young people. I love, the freshness which young people bring to your mind every single day. I, of course, started with Micah, and then I taught at NID, and at IIM Ahmedabad right now, my course has been going on for 8.5 years, and it's like, it's the top bid course not because of me teaching it, because students tell me that this is one course that they wait for. It makes so much sense to them to analyze advertising and cut it, into pieces and do something about it. So I co-created a semiotic toolkit for Ogilvy in 2006, which is used even today by the planning division. So that they sort of do an internal. Madhukar Sabnavis, who is the vice president or the president, vice president. So he still uses it, and I have lovely memories of working with that team. I won't go into all this. So why do I do this? Because brand frame, your brand is looked at through several frames, right? You have national culture, you have global culture, you have so many contexts. Again, my whole point is that the context is something that you have to keep in mind. The paradigm is, so we look at the communications and then we arrive at culture. Myths. My last point is about cultural tensions. Yeah. So when your brand or your product or your communication strategy has to work, you have to offer a bloody strong myth, which is, I was telling him during my talk that my conversation with him, that there is human brain thinks in terms of binaries. So black is black because you know that it is not white. Now, whether we like it or not, you appreciate black because it is not white. And a myth is somewhere in between, when you offer a resolution of these two oppositions, like, Hiranyakashyap. It is there in Indian mythology, it's everywhere. What was Hiranyakashyap all about? He was given a boon that he would not be killed in day, he would not be killed at night, he would not be killed by man or by woman, he would not be killed inside or outside. And Vishnu takes the avatar of the Hiranyakashyap and he kills him at the threshold, he kills him at twilight, right? Now, that is why the myth is very powerful, because whether we accept it or not, the binaries are very strong in our head. So we know the binary between day and night. In Hindustani rag, we have a rag for 4 o'clock in the evening, because 4 o'clock is when we feel very, very depressed. See, that's something which our forefathers predicted. So you have a rag which takes into account the fact that the mind is slowly dipping, and you need to uplift it. So the idea of myth is very important for brands, which is something that mythology is very deeply ingrained with ideology. Ideology is part and parcel of our life. For example, you see covers, India Today cover or Outlook covers, or, and you have depiction of pictures, right, which is very ideologically driven. So there's a very famous example that I give in my class about USA Today. So editorials are ideologically driven. We all know that. But semiotically, we need to understand how the deep structure is. Unconscious, these are not bad people. I mean, advertising is not a bad profession. They're lovely people. They're lovely human beings. Yeah, I've had the best of friends in every ad agency. It's just that, like he so rightly said, we are in the business of output, and we are in the business of producing things on an everyday basis that we forget what is gender. Yeah, who are we leaving out in the process? So once for example, for Wipro, I had this huge fight for 7 hours on what is a modern woman. Again, the marketing guys, there were 8 of them sitting there. They said modern woman for us is 24 to 25 to 30 years old. See how categories stereotype, 25 to 30, and slim, right, fair. I asked them to describe that woman for me. And they said slim, fair, it almost read like a ad for matrimonial, right? And I said, what do you mean slim? Slim-waisted or slim, behind, or slim face? I mean, what do you mean by slim? They said, no, slim body, right? And chiffon sari. I mean, look at the extent to which, we have imbibed what we call the idea of modernity. I said, how does that make her modern? Yeah. So they said, well, she's young, she's agile. I said, well, doesn't mean that Shobha Mudgal, at that time, she was very popular with the young people. I said, she's agile, she's very good looking, she has a great skin. Why can't you use her as, for example, her as your brand ambassador? They said, oh my goodness, she's so old. So, and she's fat. Now, you see, this kind of, and I'm talking of like 20 years ago, and Santur, that was a soap that I was working on with them. And I told them, if this is going to be your way forward or your vision, there will come a time when you might have sales, but you will never be remembered the way a Mysore sandal is remembered. You know, because it is such an integral part of what you call your cultural ideological space. So you might have sales because it is not as expensive as, say, a Mysore sandal. It is the number 2 soap, I think, after Lux. I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. But the point is that the idea, so when I work with companies, I work very deeply from the perspective of religion, ideology, assumptions, basically assumptions. You know, so we carry so much of assumptions with us, taken for granted. It's not that these guys, again I said, they're not bad people. They're just so nervous about meeting their targets. Because they've been given those targets to meet at the end of the month, right? And that is what is happening to our world today. As a result, our communications is also going through a change because everybody is in the business of meeting targets, so you have to churn them out very quickly. I've spoken to a lot of women in advertising, and they feel terrible because they're given briefs which they would never do it, given a chance, but they have to earn money. And they say, you know, gender-wise, we feel terrible, but we have to do it, right? So the point is that anthropology, social science, philosophy, and political science, and all these subjects, they bring in a perspective which we have to inculcate into our lives, whether it is industry, whether it is teaching, whether it is academia, wherever. I think the more we expose our younger generation to subjects of this kind, we will have a more promising future ahead. I subsequently moved into architecture and design as a social scientist, and I've had a wonderful journey so far, where I do work with landscape architects, for instance. Now again, the assumption is that what is a landscape and what is a culture? The self and the other. Again, you know, you position yourself in a binary. You are the educated self who's going into that space, which is the Warli village, okay? And you are trying to get some snippets out of their landscape, their geography, and then you're going to change it for them. Which you do it in how long? 1 week. Right? Yeah? So what I do is, I tell them to collect stories, narratives. Koi bhi kahani leke aao. Let's take the Sabarmati River. You know, the Sabarmati is dry for most of the part. It's wet. Abhi bhi Narmada ka pani se usko bhar diya hai. I'm sure all of us who are from Ahmedabad, and the funny thing about Ahmedabad is, like I was telling Anthony, कि वो export बहुत करता है, including our Prime Minister. So we are constantly sending, there's always an Ahmedabad connection everywhere, right? Okay, yeah, so the point is कि Sabarmati की को memory क्या है? Let's take landscape for instance. It's dry in most parts, but still the memory of the river is so powerful. Now how do you get to the memory of the river? You collect stories. You can't go and ask them questions. You just tell them, कहानी सुनाओ. कि क्या याद, क्या तुम्हारे, क्या कहानियाँ तुमने सुनी. And fabulous. So we did a study of the left bank and the west bank of Sabarmati River in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 villages. And very fascinating, the dry part of the river, where the stories of infertility, hopelessness, and everything which was bad about life came. And the right side, where there was some water, there were stories about fertility, hope, spring, and all kinds of things. Now, this is all in the imagination of the people. Now, that is the relationship that you have with landscape. See, the relationship of stories, that is where you have to get into the deep-seated mind. So, wahan pe, in the dry part of the river, people were still burning dead bodies and conducting rituals. Again, ritual is a very strong anthropological concept. So if you want to get into the deep structure and to understand people, you have to observe their rituals. So they were still burning bodies at the bank of the river where there was no water. But the memory of the water is so powerful in their heads. You see, कि कभी तो पानी आएगा या फिर पानी नहीं है, पहले तो पानी हुआ करता था, right? So the narrative of water in the two banks of the river gave us insights into how people were looking at the landscape, the geography, the space. And that's the kind of work that I do with architects and designers at CEPT. And now, of course, I'm part of a very important thing called the Asian Semiotics Association, which is in South Korea. So we are now trying, so you see the Eurocentric perspective of theories and philosophies. We're trying to, re-energize Japanese philosophy, Indian traditions, Indian way of thinking, Indian philosophies, Buddhist philosophies, Korean, very rich, Chinese. I don't know if China would participate after its war with Taiwan, but Russia. Russia is fabulous, not now, but I'm talking of the past when it gave us such fabulous literature and philosophers. So the point is that we want to revisit the Asian side, South Asian side of what is called thinking, and get in young people to read, to get exposed to more and more of these through different applied work in semiotics. Thank you.
Who would like to start with the questions?
I'm also a fellow JNUite, 88 to 90. I went to
We must have
international relations.
crossed paths.
May have. You were in which hostel? I was
Ganga.
Okay, I was in Periyar, so.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Did you
yes.
have a bike?
I did have a bike.
Okay.
I had long hair also. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But it's very, very exciting to listen to you. It's such a fascinating. I mean, so many things. So much to. First, my compliments. So many different things you've done, and the way you have applied this very, very hardcore academic learning into everyday situation is very, very inspiring and extraordinary, I would say. My question is this, that what you are touching upon, which seems to be an issue not just in this area, what we were discussing earlier also, which is this, for good or ill, this whole sort of Eurocentric notions. Do you, since you've worked in so many different situations, do you find this in India, especially at the highest level, industry and all of that, is that getting changed? Because we have a received wisdom from the West, which we have been living with. And a lot of times it makes no sense. After 40, 50 years, we realize maybe ghee is not a bad thing. Or Horlicks was just a scam, just sugary rubbish which we are feeding our kids. Things like that. Your take on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you for the question. It's a very tough question to ask whether there is change happening. But I see the possibilities of change, because if I can teach in an IIM Ahmedabad and get 115 students to understand that there is ideology, there is myths, there is a necessity to revisit all our advertising, and they are completely excited about the fact that we need to develop new contexts for advertising. They laugh. They in our classes we have a lot of advertising that we see, we analyze, we decode. So I think yes. See, also it's a process of globalization. So you have markets where brands are pitching in India and in Brazil, in the US. So there are brands which are coming in. So now for that, to understand local context is going to be very, very necessary. Like Coke, when it came back rather, it was by then Thumbs Up had taken over the market. When they came back, they couldn't crack the market. They thought they would come and everybody would welcome back Coke, but they didn't. It took them 10 long years after that Amir Khan campaign, which was March, I think, what was it? The Paanch wala. Yeah, Thanda Matlab Coca-Cola. It was only after that Coke managed to crack the market. So it is very essential to understand local idioms, local language. And he as he rightly put it, so what is Thanda? Yeah, again, you have to translate the idea of Thanda. It is not just about, any cold drink. It is not just a cold Coke. It is a Thanda, which you cannot translate. It's like Nakami in Bengali. Am I right? You cannot translate Nakami. Only if you go to Shantiniketan will you be able to understand what is Nakami, which is, if you can let us know later, what is Nakami? So there is certain very deeply, and again, I come back to the idea of language. So there's a very famous philosopher called Wittgenstein who said we language each other into being. Now, if we look at the way the parliament functions, to sab log, it's horrible, right? We have no language left anymore. And if languages disappear, human being, what can I call you if there's no language, if I can't call you by a name, right? So language is going to be the next big thing for us to occupy. Apart from technology, apart from, so we are going to have to name things far more meaningfully, and that is where the change will come. Context, naming, and meaning. I mean, having worked with brands like with companies like Unilever, Godrej, Wipro, Marico. So one of the fabulous study was with Marico and that parachute bottle. If that blue bottle which is there from childhood. तो वो जो उसका जो ढक्कन है उसमें हमको you get hurt. Have you noticed? With the moment you try to open it, so Marico was wondering, they tried a lot of versions of that bottle. They brought hot oil, they brought all kinds of smooth, nothing was working. So, but then they came to, we did a study together and he said, should they remove that? I said, don't. That is so deep in our memory. When you open that bottle and when you get hurt, that's when it hits you, this is parachute. Isn't it? See, otherwise you can just turn the thing and any other oil, no? But it's such a parachute memory, which takes you back, like years. And wo jab haath mein lagti hai, ouch. Yeah? Ki yaar, we get upset with the brand, but we still use it because it gives you a trust. So the opaqueness and that industrial blue, which that bottle has owned for the longest of time. So I think the idea is context. It will have to change, especially if brands want to come from outside to here, or if the brands want to re-establish themselves, they will have to, get to, like say Tanishq brought out an ad for 2 women marrying, so there was but it bombed. Now, the ad itself, by itself, was not, the context and the timing of it was wrong. It was launched during Diwali. You see, so that smartness with you will have to hone in on cultural codes is where we will have to look for. So I think, yes, there will be a change. And the more we teach semiotics, the more we teach these kind of methodologies, which is why I think I would invite all of you to attend, some kind of a course on semiotics or whatever, but method, analysis, philosophy is the only way out, not just producing.